Jake Morrison was sipping his coffee when he felt the ground shake. Then he heard that sound. 200 horses hitting the earth at the same time. When he looked out his ranch house window, what he saw froze him solid. Exactly 200 Indian warriors in perfect battle formation had surrounded his ranch. But there was something even more shocking. At the head of the formation, sitting on a black horse like an absolute queen, was a woman. Her face was painted with war paint. But those eyes took Jake back 12 years. Impossible. This was impossible. But there was an even bigger secret he didn't know yet. The woman dismounted and began walking toward Jake's house alone. No weapons in her hands, but 200 death machines waiting behind her. When Jake opened the door, the woman spoke a single word that turned his world upside down. Mapi. Jake's world collapsed. Only one person would know that word. The dying Indian chief. But he was a man. This was a woman. Or so he thought. You're not that boy. Jake stammered. The woman smiled. I was never a boy, Jake Morrison. You just saw what you wanted to see. 12 years ago, Jake had found a wounded Indian. Dying. Jake had saved him. But he never guessed that the person he saved was actually, you're the chief of the Arapaho tribe. Jake whispered breathlessly. Chief Red Eagle. And these warriors aren't just Arapaho, Cheyenne, Sioux, Pawnee, Comanche. 200 warriors from 7 different tribes. All here for one purpose. Jake's eyes swept over the war party again, this time noticing details he'd missed before. The warriors weren't all Apache. Different tribal markings, different weapons, different styles of dress. This wasn't a tribal war party. It was something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. What purpose? Jake asked, though part of him feared the answer. Justice, Red Eagle replied simply, but not the kind you might expect. And that's when Jake heard it. That sound in the distance. More horses. But these were enemy horses. Jake Morrison, shouted a familiar voice. Surrender. We're here to arrest you as a murderer. Sheriff Bradley's voice. But Jake had never killed anyone. Or had he? Red Eagle looked at Jake. Do you remember, Jake? What happened 3 nights ago in town? Jake's mind went to that terrible night. The fight in the saloon. Gunshots. Blood. And then, he remembered nothing.
Did you kill someone that night?
Red Eagle asked. I don't know, Jake answered honestly. I'd been drinking heavily. I only remember the fight and then you passed out. And when you woke up there was blood on your hands. Jake nodded. It was a horrible truth, but you didn't kill anyone, Jake. Red Eagle said calmly. The man who died that night was your closest friend Billy Hawkins. And I killed him. Jake's world shook for the second time. What? Why? Because Billy Hawkins was the man who tried to kill me 12 years ago. The night you saved me, you were actually saving me from his bullet. But you never learned that. The real face of the story was beginning to emerge. Jake hadn't just saved a wounded Indian that night. He had also saved his friend's victim. Billy never told you anything, because you never questioned him. But I followed him for 12 years, and finally I got my revenge. Sheriff Bradley's voice was getting closer. Jake, come out, you're surrounded. Red Eagle went to the window and shouted to the sheriff. Sheriff Bradley, I am Chief Red Eagle. This man is innocent. I don't trust Indian words. Bradley shouted back. Jake Morrison is a killer. And that's when Jake realized with horror that the real problem was something else. Sheriff Bradley had also been in the saloon that night, and he was the one who took Jake home while drunk. But why would he want blood on Jake's hands? Red Eagle saw the expression on Jake's face. Yes, Jake, Sheriff Bradley was Billy's partner too. 12 years ago it wasn't just Billy who tried to kill me. They were working together. Now everything was becoming clear. Billy and Sheriff Bradley had tried to kill young Red Eagle 12 years ago. Jake had unknowingly saved her. Now Red Eagle had taken her revenge. But they had also trapped Jake. So what happens now? Jake asked. Now you choose, Jake. Either come with me and learn the truth, or stay here and fall victim to Sheriff Bradley's lies. From outside, Sheriff Bradley's voice. Last time I'm saying it, Jake. Surrender. Red Eagle looked at Jake. Make your decision. But there's one more thing I want you to know. What is it? I didn't just come here to help you fight a legal battle. I came prepared for war if necessary. The implication hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun barrel. Jake realized that this woman, this leader of warriors from multiple tribes, hadn't just come to help him fight a legal battle. She had come prepared for war if necessary. There's something else you need to know, Red Eagle said quietly. Sheriff Bradley didn't choose your ranch randomly. He knows about that day 12 years ago. He knows you helped me. And he's been planning this revenge ever since. Jake's blood went cold. How could he possibly know that? Because Red Eagle said someone told him. Jake's mind reeled as he tried to process Red Eagle's words. Someone had told Bradley about that day 12 years ago. Someone who knew he had helped an Apache girl recover from her wounds in secret. Who? Jake demanded, his voice strained. Who could have known? Red Eagle's expression grew pained. Dr. Harrison, the town physician you brought to treat me when my fever got too high. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Dr. Marcus Harrison had been his friend, the only person in town he had trusted enough to help save Red Eagle's life. Harrison had sworn an oath of secrecy, had promised that no one would ever know about the wounded Apache girl. Harrison's been dead for 3 years, Jake said numbly. Yes, but before he died he confessed to his son about many things that weighed on his conscience, Red Eagle explained, including the night he helped save an Apache girl at your ranch. Jake felt sick, so he sold the information to pay off what he owed. More than that, he provided Bradley with detailed knowledge of your property, your habits, your finances, everything Bradley needed to plan this theft perfectly. Red Eagle's jaw tightened. But what young Dr. Harrison didn't know was that his father had kept detailed records of that night, medical notes, sketches of my injuries, even a pressed flower from the medicine plants you gathered to help heal me. Jake remembered those plants, wild herbs that grew near the creek, traditional remedies Red Eagle had whispered to him in her delirium. He had spent hours gathering them, following her fevered instructions because it was the only hope she had. Those records are going to save you, Red Eagle continued, because they prove beyond doubt that I was near death when you found me. No healthy Apache warrior would have been in that condition. Why does that matter legally? Because Bradley's plan depends on portraying you as an Indian sympathizer who harbored a dangerous fugitive. He intends to use anti-Apache sentiment in town to justify seizing your property as punishment for treason against civilized society. Red Eagle's voice carried cold anger. But Dr. Harrison's records prove you saved a dying child, not harbored a warrior. Jake stared at her in amazement. You've thought of everything. I've had 12 years to think about it, Red Eagle replied. 12 years to plan for the day I could repay what you did for me. But there was something else. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Young Dr. Harrison isn't just Bradley's informant. He's also his business partner. What do you mean? The 16 families Bradley cheated. After he seized their properties, someone had to tend to the family's medical needs when they became desperate. Dr. Harrison provided those services, often in exchange for the remaining personal belongings the families had left. Red Eagle's eyes flashed with righteous fury. They created a system. Bradley steals the land, Harrison profits from the misery that follows. Jake felt rage building in his chest. 2 men he had trusted, father and son, had betrayed everything decent about their professions. Tomorrow when Bradley arrives with his men, Dr. Harrison will be with them, Red Eagle said. He'll claim you're mentally unstable from living alone too long, that you're imagining persecution that doesn't exist. His medical testimony will support Bradley's legal claim, and you're going to stop them. We're going to stop them, Red Eagle corrected, but not the way they expect. She whistled sharply, and another warrior approached with a different satchel. From this one, Red Eagle withdrew something that made Jake's eyes widen, a medical bag identical to the one Dr. Harrison carried. Tell me, Jake, Red Eagle said with a slight smile, how much do you remember about those medicinal plants you gathered for me 12 years ago? Jake stared at the medical bag in Red Eagle's hands, memories flooding back. Those desperate nights 12 years ago when he had crushed willow bark for fever, gathered prairie sage for infection, and mixed chamomile tea to help her sleep through the pain. I remember some of it, he said slowly, but I'm no doctor. No, but you learned more about traditional medicine that week than most physicians learn in years, Red Eagle replied, and unlike them you learned from someone whose life depended on getting it right. She opened the medical bag, revealing not the typical doctor's instruments but carefully labeled bottles of plant extracts and dried herbs. I've spent 12 years studying both worlds of healing, traditional Apache knowledge and modern medical science. This bag contains remedies that are completely natural but produce very specific effects. Jake examined the contents. Everything looked legitimate, like something a frontier doctor might carry. What kind of effects? Temporary ones. Harmless but very convincing symptoms that will expose Bradley and Dr. Harrison for what they really are. Red Eagle selected a small brown bottle. This is concentrated extract from the root of the wild potato plant. In small doses it causes intense but brief stomach upset, cramping, nausea, sweating, symptoms that mimic serious illness. You want to poison them. I want to reveal their true nature, Red Eagle corrected. When Bradley arrives tomorrow morning, we're going to offer them coffee as any polite host would. The coffee will be treated with just enough extract to make them uncomfortable. Jake began to understand. And then we see what happens when Dr. Harrison is asked to treat genuinely sick patients, including his own business partner. It was brilliant. If Harrison treated Bradley properly, it would prove he was a competent doctor who could recognize real illness. But if he ignored Bradley's symptoms or dismissed them, it would demonstrate his priority wasn't medical care. But what about the other men? They're not part of their scheme, just following what they think is legal procedure. Exactly, which is why they will be the key witnesses to everything that happens. Red Eagle's eyes gleamed with strategic thinking. When they see Dr. Harrison fail to properly treat his own business partner, they'll start questioning everything else about their relationship. Jake nodded slowly. And that's when you present the evidence about the forged documents, not just the documents. I have something better. Red Eagle reached into the bag again and withdrew a leather journal. This belonged to the clerk in Bradley's office, the one who kept records of all the forgeries. Before he disappeared, he gave this to me. Jake opened the journal and whistled softly. Page after page of meticulous records, dates, amounts, even sketches of the forged seals Bradley used. It was more than evidence. It was a complete confession. Why did this clerk help you? Because Bradley cheated his family too. His elderly parents lost their farm to the same scheme 3 years ago. Red Eagle's voice carried deep sadness. The clerk tried to make things right from the inside, but Bradley discovered his efforts. That's when he came to me. Where is he now? Safe, hidden among my people until this is finished. Red Eagle closed the journal carefully. But Jake, there's something else you need to know. Something that changes everything about tomorrow. Jake felt his stomach tighten. What? Bradley isn't planning to just seize your ranch and leave. According to the clerk's notes, he intends to make an example of you, a public demonstration of what happens to anyone who helps Apache people. Red Eagle's expression grew grave. He's planning to burn your ranch house down after the seizure with you inside if necessary. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. This wasn't just theft, it was attempted murder disguised as legal procedure. The clerk wrote that Bradley has been telling people you're dangerous, that you're planning to attack the town with Apache allies. Tomorrow's seizure is meant to look like preventive justice. Red Eagle met his eyes directly. He never intended for you to survive this, Jake. Jake felt cold fury building in his chest. Then we better make sure our plan works perfectly. It will, Red Eagle said firmly, but only if you're prepared for the possibility that words and evidence might not be enough. Are you ready for that? Jake looked out at the mounted warriors waiting silently in the distance, then back at Red Eagle's determined face. I've been ready for 12 years. Dawn broke gray and cold over Jake's ranch. Red Eagle and her warriors had withdrawn to positions in the hills before sunrise, invisible but close enough to intervene if needed. Only Red Eagle remained, hidden in Jake's barn with the medical bag and crucial evidence. Jake had barely finished his morning coffee when he heard the approaching horses. 3 riders, Sheriff Bradley in his official vest, Dr. Harrison carrying his medical bag, and a man Jake didn't recognize dressed in an expensive suit that looked absurd in a frontier setting. Good morning, Jake, Sheriff Bradley called out as they dismounted. His tone was apologetic but firm. I'm afraid I have some unpleasant business to discuss with you. Jake stepped out onto his porch, appearing calm despite the tension coiling in his stomach. Morning, Sheriff, gentlemen. Can I offer you some coffee? Just brewed a fresh pot. The stranger's eyes gleamed with anticipated victory. How thoughtful. Yes, coffee would be welcome. Jake disappeared inside briefly, returning with a tray containing 4 cups of steaming coffee. He had prepared the drinks exactly as Red Eagle instructed, 3 normal cups and 1 treated with the wild potato extract. The treated cup had a small chip on the handle, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. Here you go, Jake said, deliberately handing the chipped cup to the stranger. Sugar's already in them. The men accepted their coffee gratefully. Dr. Harrison looked nervous, avoiding Jake's eyes. Sheriff Bradley appeared genuinely uncomfortable with his duty. Only the stranger seemed confident, sipping his coffee while studying Jake like a predator examining wounded prey. Now then, Sheriff Bradley began. This gentleman here claims you owe him a substantial sum of money, $800 to be exact. He has documentation showing you borrowed this amount 2 years ago for cattle feed and winter supplies. Jake shook his head firmly. That's completely false, Sheriff. I've never borrowed money from this man or anyone else. I keep careful records of all my transactions. Do you have receipts proving you paid cash for your supplies? Dr. Harrison asked, speaking for the first time. Of course I do. They're inside. How convenient, the stranger said with a smirk. Papers that could easily be forged after the fact. Sheriff Bradley frowned. Now hold on. Jake's word has always been good in this town, has it? The stranger challenged. Sheriff, are you aware that Mr. Morrison here has a history of harboring dangerous fugitives? Jake felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. What are you talking about? 12 years ago you provided aid and comfort to an Apache warrior who was wounded during a raid on civilian settlements. The stranger's voice carried the righteous indignation of a practiced liar. Dr. Harrison's father documented the entire incident. Dr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. My father's notes indicate medical treatment was provided to an Apache individual at this ranch. A child, Jake said firmly. A wounded child who would have died without help. A potential threat to the entire community. The stranger countered. By your own admission you harbored a hostile Apache on your property. Sheriff Bradley looked confused. Jake, is this true? You never mentioned anything about this. Before Jake could answer, the stranger suddenly doubled over, his face going pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he clutched his stomach. Something's wrong, he gasped. I feel terrible. Dr. Harrison immediately set down his coffee cup and moved toward the man, but Jake noticed something strange. Instead of examining his patient, Harrison glanced nervously at Sheriff Bradley as if calculating how his next actions would appear. What's wrong with him? Sheriff Bradley demanded. I'm not sure, Dr. Harrison stammered, pulling out a stethoscope with shaking hands. Sir, can you describe your symptoms? The stranger was now sweating profusely, his expensive suit wilting. Cramping, nausea, feels like food poisoning. Jake watched Dr. Harrison's reaction carefully. A competent physician would immediately suspect the coffee, would ask about other foods consumed, would check the man's pulse and temperature. Instead, Harrison seemed more concerned about the legal documents in the stranger's coat pocket than his patient's condition. Perhaps we should postpone this business, Sheriff Bradley suggested, genuinely concerned. No, the stranger gasped through his discomfort. We finish this now, the papers, the seizure order. And that's when Red Eagle emerged from the barn carrying Dr. Harrison's father's medical journal and the clerk's evidence. Her timing was perfect. Just as Dr. Harrison's priorities became crystal clear to everyone present. Sheriff Bradley, she called out in a clear, authoritative voice. I have information about this case that you need to see immediately. Sheriff Bradley's hand instinctively moved toward his weapon when he saw Red Eagle approaching, but something in her calm, measured stride made him pause. This wasn't the posture of someone planning violence. Who are you? Bradley demanded, though his tone was more curious than threatening. My name is Red Eagle. I'm the Apache child Jake saved 12 years ago. She held up the medical journal and the clerk's evidence, and I have proof that this man and Dr. Harrison are attempting to steal this ranch through fraudulent means. Dr. Harrison's face went white. That's impossible. You can't be. She was just a child. Children grow up, Doctor. Red Eagle replied, especially when they're given the chance to live. Red Eagle's gaze was steady and unforgiving. Your father's medical records document every detail of my treatment, including the fact that I was a wounded child, not a warrior, and that Jake Morrison saved my life through an act of pure compassion. The stranger, still doubled over in pain, snarled through gritted teeth. Sheriff, arrest her. She's a fugitive, a dangerous.
A what? Red Eagle interrupted, opening Dr. Harrison's father's journal. According to these medical notes, I was 12 years old, suffered from 3 broken ribs, a severe head wound, an infection from untreated injuries. Hardly the profile of a dangerous warrior. Sheriff Bradley accepted the journal and began reading. His expression grew more troubled with each page. These notes describe a child who was near death. What kind of raid were you supposedly part of? There was no raid, Red Eagle said firmly. I was attacked by 3 men who found me gathering medicinal plants near the creek. They left me for dead because they assumed no one would care about one missing Apache girl. Harrison had been kneeling beside the stranger, but Jake noticed he hadn't actually performed any meaningful medical examination. No checking of pulse, no questions about onset of symptoms, no attempt to determine the cause of the illness. Doctor, Sheriff Bradley said sharply, shouldn't you be more concerned about your patient's condition? Dr. Harrison fumbled with his stethoscope. Of course, the accusations are so shocking. More shocking than a man suffering what appears to be severe food poisoning. Red Eagle asked pointedly. In my experience with traditional medicine, these symptoms suggest consumption of something harmful. Shouldn't you be asking what he ate or drank recently? The implication hung in the air. A competent doctor would immediately suspect the coffee, but Dr. Harrison seemed reluctant to investigate too thoroughly. Sheriff Bradley's eyes narrowed as he observed the young doctor's strange behavior. Let me see those debt papers, Bradley demanded, extending his hand toward the stranger. The stranger clutched his coat protectively, even through his obvious discomfort. The papers are legal and binding. Red Eagle produced the clerk's journal. Sheriff, this contains detailed records of how this man creates fraudulent debt documents, the process,
the forged seals, even the names of officials he's bribed to validate false claims. Bradley opened the clerk's journal, and his jaw dropped. Page after page of meticulous documentation, including sketches of the exact seals used on the stranger's fraudulent papers. The handwriting was clear, the dates precise, the details damning. "Where did you get this?" Bradley asked. "From a clerk in this man's office who grew tired of being part of a criminal enterprise. He documented everything before fleeing to safety." Red Eagle met Bradley's eyes directly. 16 families have lost their ranches to this exact scheme. Jake's ranch was supposed to be number 17. Dr. Harrison finally seemed to realize the gravity of his situation. "Sheriff, I had no idea about any fraudulent activities. I was simply following my professional duty." "Your professional duty?" Red Eagle challenged. "Then why haven't you properly examined your patient? Why haven't you asked about possible causes of his symptoms? Any competent physician would immediately suspect poisoning and want to identify the source." Bradley looked from Harrison to the stranger to the evidence in his hands. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was ugly beyond belief. "Sir," Bradley said slowly to the stranger, "I think we need to have a very different conversation, starting with why you're so eager to complete this business transaction while you're supposedly suffering from severe illness." The stranger's eyes darted desperately between the sheriff and the evidence. Sweat poured down his face, but Jake could see calculation behind the pain. The man was cornered, and cornered animals were most dangerous. "You don't understand," the stranger gasped. "This isn't over. Even if these papers are questioned, there are others who support my claim. Important people who won't let this." He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was clear, and that's when they heard the sound that changed everything. Horses approaching from multiple directions, moving fast and with purpose. Sheriff Bradley drew his weapon, but Red Eagle simply smiled. "Those aren't enemies, Sheriff. Those are the other families this man cheated. I sent word yesterday that today was the day we finally brought him to justice." The riders approaching weren't Apache warriors. They were families. 16 groups of men, women and children on horses, in wagons, some on foot. All of them had one thing in common: the hard, determined expressions of people who had lost everything, and finally found a chance for justice. Sheriff Bradley holstered his weapon as he recognized several faces. "Tom Bradley, Sarah Hutchins, what are you all doing here?" An older man with calloused hands and worn clothes stepped forward. "We're here because that woman," he pointed to Red Eagle, "sent word that the man who stole our farms was finally going to face justice." "Now see here, Doctor," Harrison stammered. "These people are clearly mistaken about mistaken." A woman with 3 small children clinging to her skirts spoke up. "Doctor, you were there when this man seized our property. You examined my husband and declared him unfit to make financial decisions. Remember, right after he refused to sign over our deed voluntarily." Sheriff Bradley turned to Dr. Harrison with growing suspicion. "You declared people mentally unfit to support this man's claims." Dr. Harrison's face flushed red. "I provided honest medical assessments when requested." "Honest?" Tom Bradley laughed bitterly. "You said I was suffering from frontier dementia because I couldn't remember borrowing money I never borrowed. Then this man used your diagnosis to have me declared incompetent in court." Red Eagle stepped forward, still holding the clerk's journal. "Sheriff, page 43 documents the exact process. Dr. Harrison would declare landowners mentally unstable. This man would present forged debt papers, and Judge Caldwell would rubber stamp the seizures." Bradley flipped to the indicated page and read aloud. "Standard procedure. Harrison declares debtor mentally compromised due to isolation or stress. Caldwell accepts medical testimony without independent verification. Property transfer completed within 24 hours to prevent appeals." The families pressed closer, their anger palpable but controlled. These weren't vigilantes seeking revenge. They were citizens demanding justice through proper legal channels. The stranger, still suffering from the effects of the plant extract, tried to stand but stumbled. "This is all fabricated nonsense. These people are simply bitter about legitimate business transactions." "Legitimate?" Sarah Hutchins held up a piece of paper. "Then explain why the signature on this supposed loan agreement doesn't match my husband's handwriting." I brought samples of his real signature for comparison. One by one, the families began producing evidence they had gathered over the years. Letters with authentic signatures that didn't match the supposed loan documents. Receipts showing they had paid cash for supplies the stranger claimed they had purchased on credit. Testimonies from neighbors who witnessed their transactions. Sheriff Bradley stared at the mounting evidence in amazement. How did you all gather this information? She helped us, Tom Bradley said, nodding toward Red Eagle. Spent 2 years tracking us down, helping us organize our evidence, teaching us about legal procedures. She said we needed to be prepared when the right moment came. Red Eagle met Jake's eyes. I told you I learned about both worlds, yours and mine. I learned that justice requires more than anger. It requires evidence, organization, and the right moment to act. Dr. Harrison made a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Sheriff, even if there are questions about this man's business practices, that doesn't change the fact that Jake harbored a dangerous fugitive, a 12-year-old child who was dying from her injuries. Red Eagle interrupted firmly. Your father's medical records prove that conclusively, unless you're claiming your father was incompetent or dishonest. The trap was perfect. Dr. Harrison couldn't discredit his father's medical documentation without destroying his own professional credibility, and he couldn't support the documentation without admitting that Jake had saved an innocent child, not harbored a dangerous fugitive. Sheriff Bradley looked around at the assembled crowd, the evidence and the 2 men who had tried to manipulate him. His decision was clear. Sir, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. Dr. Harrison, you're under arrest as an accessory to these crimes. Bradley began pulling out his handcuffs. The seizure order is hereby declared invalid pending a full investigation. The stranger's face contorted with rage despite his physical discomfort. You have no idea what you're doing, Bradley. There are powerful people who support my business interests. This isn't over. But as he looked around at the 16 families, at Red Eagle's calm confidence and at the overwhelming evidence against him, even the stranger seemed to realize that this time it truly was over. The debt of honor that began 12 years ago with a dying Apache child was finally completely paid. But there was something Jake didn't know yet, something that would change everything once again. As Sheriff Bradley was putting the handcuffs on the stranger, a rider approached from the horizon, fast and urgent. Sheriff Bradley, the rider called out, federal marshals are coming. They're looking for a man named Jim Morrison. Jake's blood turned cold. Jim Morrison, that name echoed in his head like a distant memory. Red Eagle looked at Jake with surprise. Jim Morrison, but your name is Jake Morrison. The rider dismounted and approached. The federal marshal said Jim Morrison is a wanted man, a federal marshal who disappeared 15 years ago during a mission. Jake felt the world spinning around him. I don't understand. There's more, the rider continued. They said Jim Morrison had a brother, a man named Jack Morrison, also known as Black Jack Bradley. Sheriff Bradley's face went pale. Black Jack Bradley is my brother. Everything was connected. Jake wasn't just Jake Morrison the rancher. He was Jim Morrison, a federal marshal who had disappeared 15 years ago. And Sheriff Bradley wasn't just a corrupt sheriff. He was the brother of one of the most dangerous outlaws in the territory. Red Eagle put the pieces together. Jake, I mean Jim. That's why you saved me 12 years ago. You weren't just a rancher. You were a federal marshal working undercover. Jake's memories started flooding back. The mission, the disappearance, the memory loss, everything. I remember, Jake whispered. I remember everything. He was Federal Marshal Jim Morrison. He had been on a mission to capture Black Jack Bradley's gang, but something had gone wrong. He had been ambushed, injured, and had lost his memory. He had wandered to this ranch and started a new life as Jake Morrison, and now Black Jack is coming. Sheriff Bradley said quietly, my brother always said he would find the marshal who was hunting him. Red Eagle smiled grimly. Then let him come. We have 200 warriors, 16 families, federal evidence, and a federal marshal who just got his memory back. But there's more, the rider said. Black Jack isn't coming alone. He's bringing the entire Red Canyon gang, over 1,000 men. Jake felt his martial instincts kick in. Then we better be ready. Red Eagle whistled sharply and her warriors appeared from their hiding places. We've been ready for 12 years. The final battle was about to begin. But this time it wasn't just about a ranch or revenge. It was about justice, honor, and the debt that connects all good people across all cultures. Jake Morrison, federal marshal, stood side by side with Chief Red Eagle and 16 families who had lost everything. Together they would face the greatest threat the territory had ever seen. Because sometimes the debts we owe aren't to banks or businesses. Sometimes the debts we owe are to each other. And those debts, once paid with honor, create bonds that can never be broken. The sun was setting over Jake's ranch as he prepared for the battle of his life, but he wasn't afraid, because for the first time in 15 years he knew exactly who he was and what he had to do. The debt of honor was about to be paid in full. If you enjoyed this story of honor, justice, and unlikely alliances in the American frontier, make sure to subscribe for more incredible Western tales where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected.